So we're ready to begin here. We want to introduce to you Deidre Kay. Deidre is a lady who has done a lot of work with what's called QPR, question, persuade, refer, type of help with suicidal ideation and so on. She knows more about suicidal struggles than she'd like to, and she has skills beyond almost all of us in understanding clearly what it's all about, and also how to continue to work with it as we have people in our lives who struggle with this situation in their lives. So, Deidre, thank you so much for being here. We're back together again. It's not our first time together, and I'm really pleased to have her back. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, and good morning, everybody, or I should say afternoon. We've just enjoyed some lunch together, and I'm so glad to see so many people joining us, not only here, but also online. So welcome to everybody. My name is Deidre. That's a mouthful and a lot of vowels. If you want to shorten it up to D, that's the fourth letter in the alphabet and a little bit easier to remember for most. I am so pleased to be here and to share this message with you. We're going to cover a lot of topic here. Because suicide is much bigger than the limited view that most of us have been exposed to by societal standard, I want to dive into some of the contributing factors and really spend a little bit of time this morning on mental health, mental wellness, and how it is that we view this topic not only in our own lives but also in the lives of others around us, and how we might be able to bring a greater understanding to what mental illness is, what it is not, and how we can be survivors of many, many challenges throughout our lives. And then hopefully take some of what we're learning on that portion of the presentation home with us and apply that in our day-to-day. We're then going to dive into what is called QPR, as Phil shared, which does stand for question, persuade, refer. It is a 3-step evidence-based process that has been proven successful in de-escalating suicidal ideation and allowing individuals who may have otherwise taken an action to harm themselves and turn them back toward the opportunity for help. My background, just a little bit before we really dive into this. I am this year, January 24th, a 20-year survivor of the most significant suicide attempt that I've had. I also have lost a dear friend of mine 7 years ago this June to suicide. My 2 sons have both experienced suicide ideation, one of which has survived an actual attempt. And it wasn't until my friend passed away that I realized I knew nothing about this topic. I've been truly terrified twice in my life. The first time I was on an emergency room table, and I had that moment of clarity when I realized I didn't want to die, but perhaps I wasn't going to get that chance to make that decision. The second time was when Kirk passed away, and I realized I truly had no idea how somebody who was so incredible, a great friend for many years, business colleague, we ran our businesses simultaneously and somewhat overlapped our services that we provided to our clients. And we had talked about everything under the sun, many adversities that we had both faced and could relate to one another. And the one thing that we had not talked about was suicide. And that's because I literally lied to him when he asked me about physical scars that I still have today from one of the 2 different methods that I had used to end that psychological pain. At that time, 13 and a half years earlier. And so I changed the subject, and I got so good at doing that anytime that I was asked about those scars that it never occurred to me, then or any other time that I was asked, that perhaps he was somebody who I didn't know what I didn't know, and who just simply needed somebody to say, I've been there, I understand. Let's walk this journey together, you'll be okay. In that recollection, what really occurred within me was a severe fear that if I didn't understand how I had lost this amazing person in my life, what was going to keep me from going there again? And it was out of that realization that I made the decision to study and to learn and to get to know myself in a new way. And from that work, I've created programs that have helped hundreds of other individuals survive and understand not just how to be alive, but how to live. And so we're going to cover a little bit of that content today. The vast majority of us have experienced either thoughts of suicide, have survived an attempt, or we know somebody else who has. And our statistics at this time on mental illness tell me that 51% of all Americans at any given point in time are experiencing some form of mental illness. My kids would tell you that I'm really not good at math, but even I know that that's the majority, so that means that 51% of us, will just split it down the room. This side of the room, welcome to my club. You guys just wait. Eventually, something's going to fall out from underneath you, and it'll be your turn too. And so we're going to get into a little bit too about how mental illness really has a couple of different ways in which it affects our lives. Situational and chronic. And when we get to that, I want to share with you what I believe is possible for individuals who do experience different forms of mental illness, and be very transparent with you here today. I always say I'm an overachiever, so anything that I do, I make sure I do it really, really well. I have multiple forms of mental illness. Some have been chronic, some have been situational. Those include depression, traditional depression, anxiety, and then we figured out that the depression wasn't just depression, that I actually have bipolar and PTSD. And so all of these things, while they do create unique challenges, have actually, through the years, become a great blessing. And so I want to be able to share a little bit on that as we're going through, so that maybe you experience some of these challenges in your own personal life. Maybe you're experiencing them through a loved one or through a friend. And I think it's really important that we recognize that it is through connection that prevention is possible. And what I mean by that is not just the prevention of a life lost, but also the prevention of missing out on this life, because we're living in that level of psychological pain that often occurs when we are experiencing some form of mental distress. Does all that make sense? And again, to those of you who are signing in with us here, I'm so excited that you're here, so please know I haven't forgotten that you're there. Can we give a round of applause for the people who are sitting at home? So thank you for actually joining us. But I have to tell you, there was a great spread of food out here, and all of these amazing humans, they just enjoyed while you were wherever you are. So we're sorry that you missed out on that, but we're glad that you're here for this part. So I get this fun little clicker. It's going to help us through. We're going to focus on engaging mindful change. And when I say mindful, that means that we're going to keep our focus here, and we're going to use the opportunity to fill our minds with the opportunity for change. Change is a decision that we make. Sometimes we do it by choice, and sometimes we do it because there is no other choice. But we're really going to be looking at suicide prevention and recognizing that knowledge is power, which I love that that is the theme of today's presentations. Okay, so this is going to be a really fun part, and I have a couple of people who are helping me with this exercise. I want us to explore what failure has taught us. And so Kara's going to be giving those of you who are here today a test. Yes, you heard that right. You have to take a test. Do not turn your test over. Just keep it on your lap, upside down, the way that you received it. Each one of you is getting your own test, so please do not look at it. For those of you who are at home tuning in with us, you will get a version of the test showing on your screen shortly, so you still get to participate. And then if you have questions and contributions, you'll be able to share those and be a part of our active engagement here today. Did everybody here in our local audience receive a test and you still have it upside down, correct? Okay, not because of COVID, though we certainly want to be mindful, but the three of you who are sitting close together, I need you to spread out because we cannot help one another in this test. Did you guys study? They're laughing. I'm a little concerned. It tells me that you guys did not get the study material. We're going to do this anyway. So, as I shared, we're going to keep the test upside down until I instruct you. When I instruct you, you're going to turn over the test. You're going to read the instructions at the top of the test, and when you are done with your test, you are going to write the answer. Hopefully you've got a pen. Write the answer in the lower right-hand corner of your test, and you're going to flip your test back over. We're going to have approximately 2 minutes, and again, each of you has your own test, so there is no sharing ideas or looking at each other to help them with theirs. Fair enough? Okay, 2 minutes. When you're done, flip your test over so that it's upside down again, look back up, and that's what I'm going to use as my timer. Ready? Go. Okay, we should be getting close to wrapping up. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Everybody should be done. Excellent. How do you guys think you did? I've got 2 thumbs up back here. We've got some nodding. A lot of confidence going on. I like it. I like it. How many of you, by a raise of hand, and each of you had your own test, and I'm sorry that I can't see you at home. You can play along if you want to raise your hand, though. How many of you found 6 of the letter that you were looking for? Okay, so we've got 3 of you. How many of you found, actually I think there was 4, how many of you found 7 of the letter you were looking for? Okay. 8 of that letter? Okay. How many of you found 9? 3. Okay. And how many found 10? Well, we know how these got handed out. Okay. How many of you found 11 of the letter? No overachievers. The correct answer was 10. So, as you can see on the screen behind me, you are all taking the exact same test. So now I have to ask you whether you were at home or you were here. How is it that the exact same test given for the exact same amount of time with the exact same preparation methods that you guys obviously took in studying for this resulted in so many different answers? Thoughts?
I went through it twice, and the first time I found 8, and I thought I would go back and look again, and I found 10 just under the wire. And I think what happened was I missed the F at the end of
Oh, you're so brilliant. What is your name?
That's mine, Carol.
Carol. So what Carol has just shared, for those of you who might not have heard, is so key to this particular exercise. She looked through it, she found all of the F's, thought, you know what, I'm just going to do one more quick review, and she found the word of, O-F, contains an F, but often is missed because of the way that we pronounce it, not only when we speak it, but also when we read it in our minds. Interesting, isn't it? How many of you, like Carol, read through it twice? How many of you read through it 3 times or more? If you read it word by word and were deliberate about that, raise your hand. How many of you actually looked only for the letter F? Did any of you scan the words and the letters backward? A couple of you? Notice, and I don't know if you're seeing here, and certainly if you're at home with us, you may not have seen, but we have a lot of different methods that were used. The point of this exercise is summed up in one question. What would have happened if we would have had this test on the screen and we had all contributed toward finding the F's? What would the outcome have been? A 10. Remember how just a couple of moments ago I shared with you? Connection is the key to prevention. When we work together, we have more ideas, we have more processes, we have more support, and that goes far beyond an F test. And who really wants to get an F, right? It is when we are connected that we're able to live the life that we were meant to have here. We're meant to be able to support one another, to share ideas, to encourage, and to get through those challenges, including tests that you didn't study for, called life. Anybody get a preview manual on how to live life perfectly? If you did, I'd pay some serious money for that. So, think about it. We all bring different experiences, and it's those experiences that build our humanity. And when we share those experiences with others, life doesn't seem so intimidating, especially when we know that we're walking this journey surrounded by other individuals who have been walking a journey as well. What lessons have we learned here? Share with me here anything that comes to mind of how this might apply in your own personal life or what your takeaway is. And it may have been something that I said, it may be something that is a little bit off track that we can learn from you.
Isolation is not a good thing.
Isolation is not a good thing. Right now, as we continue with a pandemic that suggests that we should not be in community with one another, we really have to be vigilant about recognizing the psychological toll that takes place when we do not have connection with others. And with that being said, and you're absolutely right, we really have to make a concerted effort to connect with individuals that live alone or who have a limited opportunity to connect with others. Perhaps not only do they live alone, but they're retired and they don't work, or they're disabled and they don't work outside of their home. So give that some consideration, because you're absolutely right. And what is your name? Luke. Thank you, Luke. Any other thoughts? That's probably the most significant for sure. Write down, please. Always check your work. And isn't that even true just in life? Always be present and mindful of what you have accomplished each day and what you might do tomorrow that will make a better outcome. And that's on both sides of the coin, because there are things that we do in a day that we can be really proud that we accomplished something, or that we did something different, or we challenged ourselves, or we helped somebody else. And then there are what my husband calls those cringe moments, right? That you go, oh gosh, right? We've all had them. And those are the opportunities then that when we stop and we take pause and we recognize them, that we can be mindful to choose a different path in the future with our behaviors, our actions, our interactions, who we're around, how we're engaging with them. Excellent point. Check your work. You are your greatest work. Please.
It's okay if we think
It is perfectly okay. That is the lesson. My now 27-year-old son and I, we wrote a poem years ago, and it starts out, I am, and then for every letter of the alphabet, there's a different statement. And I love the letter I. It is, I am imperfect, and then in brackets, it says, and that's okay. Such a great point. Yeah. We get to work to improve, but we should never expect perfection. That would kind of steal the joy out of life, right? So I shared with you that I really wanted to focus on mental wellness here to get us started. And there are 7 different segments that make up what I term whole wellness. And for an individual who's experiencing suicidal thought, or really for all of us, it can often be very challenging to find balance in all of these various areas of our lives. I list mental illness as the most significant of these 7 segments. And that is because there is nothing that we do in our life that our mental capacity and awareness and ability to cognitively connect with the world around us is not involved. And so we do have to be mindful of where our thoughts are taking us. A really good friend of mine years ago, she said, Deetra, your mind is a very scary place. She went on to say, I encourage you to never go in there by yourself. Just grab a tour guide, somebody who can help you find your way out. If you want to go in, go in. Just make sure somebody else is there with you when you do it. Probably some of the best advice anybody's ever given me. Your intellectual wellness is really that desire to learn. It's that natural internal intrigue and curiosity that we're all born with. And it allows us to continue to feed our brain with more information, how to engage in new experiences that give us increased knowledge. And I think for any of us that ever attended even our first class in college, you heard the best way to learn something is to teach somebody else. And when we talk about knowledge being power, we really need to recognize that power used internally for us to benefit from what we've learned is only one part of the value and beauty in gaining that knowledge. Next, physical wellness. And I think that this is probably the area that most of us are familiar with because it's talked about the most. I do want to just go into this a little bit because there are actual things that we can do that naturally allow our brains to produce more dopamine, more serotonin, and give us that happy feeling. And they have so much to do with this physical aspect. So on a day when you are not overly excited about having to get out of bed, put your feet on the floor, and challenge whatever is coming ahead, it is highly encouraged that you spend every day 15 minutes or more outside, walking in an area that you're going to come in contact with some form of nature. Nature can be the sound of trees, birds, animals, different people walk with their dogs, things like that. The sun's impact on us has one of the most recharging and valuable effects as anything else that we can ever come in contact with. And even when the sun is behind clouds, the rays that it provides for our body still produce those positive influences. The physical activity actually causes us to breathe in deeper because our body requires more oxygen. More oxygen into our lungs gives more oxygen to our brain, which allows us to think clearer. And with the movement forward, psychologically, we see ourselves making progress. Plus, the movement of our body. We have all these limbs and all of these organs and everything that are meant to work in unison, and when we are staying in one position, we're not giving them that opportunity to stay fluid. So get up, get moving, connect. That in and of itself can do a lot for our physical wellness as well as other parts, because then we dive into environmental wellness. That means being a part of the environment, and it doesn't necessarily mean just being a part of the environment outside. It's about what you're surrounding yourself with inside. Do you have plants? Are you using your resources wisely? Do you feel good about how much waste you have versus how much you're saving in the environment? That can also apply at work in different initiatives that you can do to encourage that we appreciate what is around us. That's even Smokey the Bear, fire safety if you're going to have a bonfire, which I hope many of you will throughout the summer. It's those little things that make all the difference in how we feel about the space that we are a part of. Of course, it makes sense that we would talk about our spiritual wellness, as those of us who are here in person today are inside of a chapel. And this really isn't necessarily where you have to focus only on a particular religion or a particular practice. This is about how do you feel connected to something or someone greater than you. And that can ebb and flow and have different meanings. And for those who are Christian, that can have a wonderful meaning in understanding what the Bible teaches, but it also can mean that when you are out on a walk, you're appreciating the connection to nature in what was obviously a complex recipe to be able to make this world that we live in. So spirituality can be grandiose. It's whatever is speaking to your heart right then that says, I'm a part of something great. The social aspect, again, comes back to some of the challenges that we're facing and the idea that isolation is not good for us. Our brains were actually designed to need, not want, I'm saying need, connection. For those of you who identify as Christian and you understand some of the readings in the Bible, you'll also recognize that on more than one occasion, Jesus Christ himself said, when two or more are gathered. I do not believe that this is by accident. The intent is that we would be connected to one another, and one of the greatest challenges that we face in our mental wellness is that we see somebody that is different than, and we create distance from that different. They don't dress like me, they don't talk like me, they don't behave like me, they've done this, they've done that, something doesn't feel like me. There are a lot of ways to be able to still fit within that idea of connection without necessarily being fully entrenched into what might not necessarily feel comfortable. And it can be something as simple as saying hello. It can be something as simple as offering to carry groceries for somebody that you see is maybe struggling. As easy as signing up for some form of a sports league when we get those a little bit more active, coming to events like this, and even doing things online where you are still connected to something bigger. Find ways to engage. And one of the most beautiful things that I think that we can do with this experience that we call life is volunteer. And it's such a wonderful way to be able to connect with people that are different than how we view ourselves. And the more that we do that, I made a commitment to myself. It's been probably close to 10 years now. And I decided, because I realized that I was surrounded by a lot of negative thoughts, and then I was also producing those thoughts. And I made a conscious decision. I'm not one for New Year's resolutions, but I am one for continuous growth and improvement. And so I didn't really set a resolution other than to say, I will judge less, get curious more. End of story. Judge less, get curious more. And I'm not perfect at it, but through the years I've gotten so much better. And I really find that at this juncture in my life, I truly have no desire to judge anybody. None. What I also discovered was that the judgments that I had of other people were founded in the image that I have of myself, that what I was doing was the only way to do it right, and who I was what everybody else should be. And how depleting of an experience that would be if that were true. Because truth be told, I don't want you guys to be like me. I want you to be uniquely, beautifully you, and for me to have the opportunity to walk this journey with you so that I can learn and grow. That's the part of not judging. But I wanted to take it a step further, and I hope that you'll consider this in your own lives. I got curious. When I'm busy judging somebody else, it's a one-way conversation. When I get curious and I ask people about their personal experiences or why they feel that way, not so that I can defend my position, but so that I can learn. I've learned individuals that have done things that I might have really questioned, oh my goodness, could I be around this person? Their personal experience led them to certain actions that had I walked their journey, I don't know that I would have done things different. That doesn't mean that I would have done what they did. It means that it gives me a new perspective and a new appreciation. This also includes people that I may have at one point thought were out of my league. We know that term, right? To just realize that nobody is out of anybody else's league. We came into this world the same. None of us is going to leave this world alive, to my knowledge, which means there's a whole lot of opportunity here in this middle area to realize how similar we are, and then to appreciate those differences, both in experiences and in actions, and celebrate them. Because again, it gives us an opportunity, if nothing else, to learn from others what they've experienced so that it helps us either want to mirror those behaviors or steer away from them, because now we know what took somebody else down a path that we know we wouldn't want to be on. And at the same time, just simply to be empathetic, to recognize that not everybody else has lived the lives that we have, be empathetic with them, and then to be empathetic toward ourselves, to recognize that some people have had it easier, but that's okay too. Does that make sense? The final point in our 7 stages of, or segments of whole wellness is occupational. I was asked, I've changed my career path recently, pretty significant, and I'm working with individuals who are, in many cases, completely changing their career path as well. And I was talking with somebody, it was just a couple of days ago, and she said, I am so nervous going into this interview. I know what I know, but I'm so nervous about actually going in and speaking on that. And what I shared is that our occupations, those interviews, are the perfect opportunity for us to engage in the social aspect of wellness. Because anytime that you're going into an interview, you just simply have 2 or more people that are meeting and getting to know each other, the same way that you would if you were introduced to somebody that someone said, you know what, you're going to love hanging out with this person, you've got to meet them. It's nothing different. And in most of those social environments, what's one of the first questions that we ask? So what do you do? Right? It's like the easy icebreaker. In an interview, I told her, you're in the environment that's the intended question. So when you get there, you're already friends. So much of how we view the world, ourselves, and where we fit in it has to do with our perspective. In fact, that may be the number one influence on how we make it through this world, is how we perceive it. And it's not just about the world that's out there, it's the world that's in here and where we see ourselves fitting in with all of this. Find ways and encourage others to find ways that life doesn't feel so intimidating, because the truth is every single one of us is walking this journey together. We just sometimes get to cross paths a little more closely. But all of our paths are far more alike than they've ever been different. And when we recognize that, then the idea of being able to help somebody who might be in mental distress, and even to the point of having suicidal thoughts, becomes less and less and less intimidating. Because we've all been to the point where we just didn't know if we wanted to wake up tomorrow. And while that might not be an intentional, I want to end my life, there is a level of desperation in that moment of just wanting to fall asleep, and you know what, if I don't wake up, okay, it was God's will, I can live with that. Which means that there's a small part of us that can appreciate what psychological pain is, and that it affects all of us. That's the starting point. When we recognize how similar we are, then helping somebody else who's in a different phase of the way that they're thinking becomes a lot more approachable. So, I shared just a little bit. I like these little previews. You ever watch like a movie and they set the stage in the first 5 minutes and then like 20 minutes in you go, oh, that's where they were going with that. I love storytelling. So I mentioned a little bit earlier that there are different forms of mental illness, but that I believe that those forms of mental illness actually break down into 2 categories. So in the little diagram that you're seeing here behind me, we're going to start out this journey of understanding how we can process mental illness into wellness by recognizing that mental illness, again, is something that 51% of all of the people around us, and ourselves included, are experiencing at any one given time. Now, there are certain words that I'm not fond of when it comes to my different diagnoses, but one of them that I actually celebrate is the word crazy, because the truth is, crazy just might work, and it's worked for me for a long time, because that's where I get my creativity, and that's where I push limits that result in really amazing outcomes. That's where I'm able to connect with people in ways that my husband goes, oh my gosh, you did not just go up to that complete stranger and introduce him to our friend. And I say, oh yes, I did. And by the way, we have a wedding invitation, August 4th. So that little bit of something that's different wasn't always there for me to understand what it was. But it's because of this term mental illness that sometimes I go into hyperdrive with that enthusiasm. And in learning how to manage that, there have been some really amazing things that have come out of it. Those 2 different classifications, I identify them as situational and chronic. Raise your hand if you know somebody with a chronic illness. You can all raise your hand because I have a chronic illness. Bipolar is a chronic illness. It can be treated, but it does not go away. Yay! So, there are forms of mental illness that will require lifelong treatment. Just like there are other illnesses, heart disease, diabetes, of the physical body that require ongoing maintenance in order to be able to live our best life. And this organ up here is no less important in being able to recognize the need for taking care of it than this organ or this organ or this one or whatever's over here. I'm not a medical person, that's my husband's field. But all of these organs, they work together. The only difference is that this one here, it's responsible for making sure that all of this works. So when a person is experiencing the downside of some form of mental illness, that's when we expect that they're supposed to be at their very best and make the very best decisions, utilizing the exact organ that is in a sense of dis-ease. Think about that. It makes no sense. That's like telling somebody who has heart disease that they should just love more and it will go away. Heart. That idea of chronic illness, however, does not limit our ability to be able to improve the quality of our life. And so I want to talk about situational mental illness, because this is actually where most of us end up falling. This is where we have anxiety under certain circumstances, where we experience depression. And in those circumstances, that's actually a very natural part of this human condition. Those are indicators to us that when we are paying attention, remember I said at the end of the day, pay attention to what's going on in here and what you were doing so that you can kind of correct for the next day. When we are experiencing sped up heart rate, clammy palms, having a hard time breathing, that fight, flight, freeze, or shut down, those are all protective instincts that, when gone untreated and unmodified, can become so overwhelming that we begin to be controlled by them rather than us being able to use them to our advantage. Somebody who is sad, and even to a level of depression because they've lost a loved one or they lost a job or whatever may have happened, that is normal. It is absolutely normal that when we have loss, we would experience sadness, even to a degree, depression. The difference between sadness and situational depression and chronic depression, 2 weeks. If you are experiencing a bout of depression that lasts 2 weeks or longer, it is a clinical form of depression that requires a diagnosis and treatment by a doctor, the same way that if you had lower back pain that was really bad for a couple of weeks, you'd probably say, okay, I tap out, find me a doctor. Same thing. For somebody who has reoccurring episodes, that window might become shorter. So when somebody says, oh, it's not a big deal, just leave me alone, I just need whatever, and maybe that ends up being you that's saying this, look at the frequency and the length of time that you're going through those episodes. The same thing is true with anxiety, which can flare up because you may have a more significant or serious diagnosis of mental illness, but those things can incorporate in. So pay attention to what your brain and your body are telling you and get the help, and encourage others to do the same. When I was much younger, I had severe anxiety. My very first time of having to speak in high school, I held onto the podium so hard, so tight, that when my time was up, well, first of all, my 6-minute speech was done in 32 seconds. And my hands were so tight clenched that I couldn't fix my fingers to open. So I literally remember pulling them off from the podium and walking back and pulling them straight. I failed speech in college. That was my F test. Like those experiences where I've learned how to become much more comfortable sharing personal parts of my life that I would have never even acknowledged, not only to you, but even to myself in some cases. It took a lot of different things coming together: people, support, treatment, my own frame of reference having to change. And today, I have regular anxiety like anybody else. You can have forms of mental illness that can be healed to a point that they do not influence your life. And I don't think we do enough talking about that, to actually recognize that this isn't a life sentence. And that even more serious forms of mental illness is not a life sentence that says you don't get to enjoy and love life. It's all about perception and what we choose to do with those thoughts and the people around us. So in my case, and I'll use myself as the example, I started out in this wonderful journey of adulthood with chronic and situational mental illness. And I had two choices just like anybody else does. I could either get treatment and follow the course and modify as necessary and experiment, but be honest with myself and the people around me, including my doctors. I have a medical team. I call them my life coaches. You would call them psychiatrists and psychologists. That's fine, those are all semantics. But they coach me through life. I've even had to get new coaches, as one will retire or move or whatever the case might be, or maybe I've outgrown that experience and now I need to move into another opportunity of growth. But nobody makes it into the NFL as a first draft pick How many of you guys are actually watching on TV? My husband is. None of us get to that kind of level of success in life or in sports or in anything without putting in the effort, putting in the time, focusing on what's already strong and building it stronger. So we can either do that treatment, or we can choose not to, or maybe dabble in it a little bit. I told you that you can call me D. Did you know that without any formal education, I went by Dr. D for probably at least almost 20 years, about 15 years, because every time that I would have a doctor who would say, okay, this is what we're going to do, I would be so overridden with need for help that I'd jump in and say, I am on board. And then I'd start feeling better. And did you know that if you feel a little bit better, you don't need to listen to the doctors out there because the doctor within knows better? Oh, I did this for years. That is, for somebody who doesn't like roller coasters, I lived on one. I don't recommend. And it's really about getting comfortable with the idea that treatment is just a part of the journey. It is not a punishment. It is not a less than sentence. It's an opportunity to get curious about yourself, the world around you, and where you want to fit in it. That's all it is. And you can go from situational and create situational mental illness into a chronic condition. You can take a chronic condition and you can heal from that so that it only occurs every once in a while, because that is when life is supposed to remind you that you're still human. But there's only one path to being well, and that is to be consistent in your treatment. Even if you've never had a mental illness, it likely is because you have built skills, you have resources, you have connections that allow you to maintain that state of wellness. There's only one path, and that is to be present, mindful, and to every day do an appraisal so that you can continue to be your very best self. Does this make sense? I hope that it helps for those who have struggled like I did with that very uncomfortable roller coaster ride. So we're going to get down to the brass tacks of this idea of where mental illness fits into the subject matter here today and how to save a life. 9 out of 10 individuals who die by suicide had at the time of their death one or more forms of diagnosable mental illness. Now, that doesn't mean that they had been formally diagnosed. That doesn't mean that they were in any form of treatment. It doesn't even mean that they were consciously aware. Because a lot of times, the challenges that we face, we don't see them. We're too close to ourselves. You've heard the frame, you're not the right person to fix the problem because you're too close to the problem. I don't know how you get any closer to yourself than being yourself. So it's really important to recognize that individuals who are struggling don't always recognize that from within themselves, but that also one of the more significant influences on becoming suicidal in thought is untreated mental illness, or subtreated. There is a ripple effect when we talk about the topic of suicide, and I think it's really important that we talk about this because we don't talk about this. And that is, sorry about that, for every one person who dies by suicide, 25 others have attempted to end their level of psychological pain but survived. 25. That's a lot of pain that is still going on out there. And that is likely a very small number in comparison to what the real number is, because we know that there are numerous attempts that go unreported. and in some cases very serious attempts that went unreported. And for every one person that dies by suicide, 135 survivors, people who are still here, that will miss that void that now exists, will continue on, questioning, what could I have done different? So as we get into QPR, this is part of what we can do different. I shared before, remember that preview, and then down here you're like, oh, that's where she was going. So the theme today is that knowledge is power, and I shared with you that you can do your own research into whatever topic that you want. Use what you learn, whether you're talking to people, going online, whatever it is, your own personal experiences, and take that knowledge and choose to do something really good for yourself with it, to learn from it and to become a better version of yourself today than you were yesterday. But if you want to make a really big difference, then you will take that knowledge. I'm missing a slide. Oh. Everybody have a pen and paper? Okay, we get to do this the more fun way. See how knowledge is power is written up here? All of you guys at home, see it? Back here. I want you to write it on a piece of paper exactly the way you see it, with all capital letters of knowledge is power, and I want those 3 words to be aligned and centered. We're going to do something really, really fun here. It's actually more fun to do it this way than it is to see it on the screen. So, everybody got that? It only takes 4 letters to completely change this phrase. At the beginning of the word power, I want you to write in lowercase letters the letters E and M. And at the end of the word power, in lowercase letters, I want you to write the letters M, E, N, T. Carol, what does it say? Knowledge is what? Empowerment. Empowerment happens when we empower somebody else with what we knew and chose to share. And did you know that you have not learned anything outside of your own personal experiences that wasn't shared with you? Anything that you have gained because somebody else wrote about it, did a movie about it, wrote a song about it, told you about it, wrote a letter, whatever it was, everything that you have ever learned was because somebody else chose to share it with you, unless it was your own personal experience. You have been empowered your entire life because others have chosen to share with you what they knew. So when you learn something, I believe it is our responsibility to share that knowledge. It's great if you can do something to make yourself a better person, but if you can take that knowledge and help somebody else see the world a little bit different and make that world a little bit better, that's a gift. Make sense? See, it's so much better when I miss a slide. That was completely intentional. So, I just keep messing up with my little clicker. We are going to jump into QPR. There are a lot of little blanks on your sheets. I want you to fill them in, and I'm going to try to make sure that I do so that you can feel confident in what you're taking down with your notes. Here's what QPR is not. In our 2 hours that we're going to spend together here today, you will not leave here with a PhD in psychology. You will not leave here a doctor or an EMT, unless you already were before you came into the room. I got nothing to offer you in any of those classifications. What QPR is it's an opportunity to offer hope to somebody who is in a suicidal crisis or in a state of ideation. That's all it is. You're offering them hope. And there's going to be 3 steps that we're going to take in order to make that offer of hope something that they are willing to embrace. So, to get us started, we're going to offer ourselves a little bit of insight as to helpful terms that we should be focusing on. You will notice that I've used the word suicide ideation more than once. That's just the thought of suicide. You will also notice that earlier when I was sharing with you my own personal story, I referred to myself as an attempt survivor. I had an attempt. I survived. I didn't try to kill myself. I tried to end a level of psychological pain that I didn't have the tools to be able to manage. I am a loss survivor in that somebody who I cared about deeply died by suicide. And any contact that we have with the topic of suicide and somebody dying would be considered to be an exposure. So that can be that you knew somebody at work. It could be a neighbor. It could be a family member. It could be that you're watching television and they talk about it and they actually make it clear that somebody has died by suicide. That is having exposure. What we're not going to say during our time together is that somebody committed suicide. How many of you guys have ever said committed? I'm going to raise both hands because I'm an overachiever and I used to say it all the time. That's what we heard. That's what we were conditioned. But when we use this term, what we're really saying is that the individual, number one, had the capacity at the time to choose something different. It's also associated with unlawful behavior. They've committed a crime. And we're not recognizing that action for what it is. Again, the organ that is not well was not in a mindset in the ability to protect itself and to make a healthy, bound decision. Again, I shared suicide isn't about somebody killing themselves. If we're going to say that somebody killed themselves because they died by suicide, then we should say the same thing for the person who was eating cheeseburgers, and I am a huge fan of cheeseburgers. We know that those aren't healthy for us, right? There's a lot of things that we can do that aren't necessarily in our best interest and that we can end up dying from, but nobody ever says, it's really too bad that, my uncle killed himself because he had a heart attack. See what I'm saying? All of a sudden, that phraseology just doesn't even fit. Or that somebody failed at their suicide attempt. Anybody here look at me and consider me to be a failure because I didn't die? Think about it. You say that somebody failed at suicide. What you're saying is, next time, get it right. And we wouldn't say that, but that's exactly what those words say. So what we'd say is that somebody has died by suicide, or that they survived a suicide attempt, or are a suicide attempt survivor. Does this make sense? Yes? You at home, nod with me? Good. Okay, so any of you ever hear of a man by the name of Dr. Thomas Joyner? I'm going to tell you a little bit about Thomas. He's actually a personal friend of mine, but that's only because I stalked him and finally got him to talk to me. I think they've lifted the restraining order now. Thomas, if you ever see this, please laugh. Dr. Joyner lost his father to suicide. His father was in his 50s, strong man, principled man. Thomas was in school, in college, when he received that call, that notification, and his focus on study was research. And here he was in a similar position to what I was 7 years ago, trying to figure out how it is that he lost his father, because nothing made any sense. It just didn't add up. And so, like me, he got curious, and he wanted to know. Today, Dr. Joyner is one of the most well-respected researchers on the topic of suicide. What causes it, which then helps us understand, in part, how we get to help somebody with that framework of hope. And here's what he and all of the researchers that have worked with him came to believe. The research suggests that an individual who is suicidal both feels alone and as though they are a burden on others, while simultaneously being completely fearless of whatever action it would take in order to end that level of pain from feeling alone and feeling like a burden. Now, the first two of those make sense to me because I understand the idea of feeling alone. At some point, we've all been in a room crowded with people and felt alone. I actually believe that this is one of those protective things that we have as mankind, that were it not for the fact that we actually have the capacity to feel alone, we would have no desire to be around other people. And again, remember how I said that's kind of part of how we're wired? So if we had no desire to be around other people, number one, wouldn't it have been so much easier for God to just poof, there's a planet, Carol, this is yours. Poof, there's a planet, Dee, this is yours. And we could have created our own little planets, right? That would have had unicorns and poppies and rainbows and butterflies, and the clouds would have been made out of cotton candy, and they wouldn't have had any calories, and life would have been really good on my planet. Except that that's not the way that it works. We are designed to be together. And if we didn't have that design, we would have ceased to exist. We have to come together in order to create life. Really an important part of being here even yet today, right? Secondly, we've all felt at some point that we were a burden on somebody else. And I liken the concept of burden as kind of this scale. What do I give to you? What do you give to me? And sometimes that scale is a person. Sometimes it's an organization, it's society, it's whatever, right? And again, I think that this is part of this beautiful design that says, let's try to do what we can to keep that scale balanced for the most part. And if we didn't have that, and I was good with what I know, and you're good with what you know, and what I can do and what you can do, but we keep our distance, and we don't have to find ways to work together, we would not exist. We wouldn't have technology, we wouldn't have the opportunity to have somebody lift a board in place while we nail it. I mean, the most simple things. So it's a good thing that we have these, but when they're in overdrive, and sometimes it's not about what's reality, it's about perception, I can perceive myself as being a burden, and everybody around me can be looking at me saying, you're not. I can feel completely alone with people surrounding me. But my brain may not process that. So when you get those two belief systems, whether factual or not, going inside of your mind for an extended period of time, that is where we see suicide ideation form and grow. That's what the research has shown us. Now, there's a lot of other contributing factors, but these are two significant factors. But how many of you have ever thought of an individual who died by suicide or who attempted suicide as being fearless? I've heard the opposite, that they're weak, that they're selfish. Including when I would tell myself that. But research actually shows that we are designed to live. From that very first breath, biologically, mentally, we were designed to thrive and to desire that. Which means there is a lot of unraveling that has to take place in the brain to switch and become completely fearless against whatever it might take in order to end the psychological pain caused by the sense that I'm alone, and the world would be better off without me. And in a unique twist of how I see this, my friend who died was the strongest person that I know, because he fought for days, months, and I learned even years to stay here and to give the joy that he brought to the people in his life. That takes strength when you have that level of pain. So I'll defend forever that there was nothing weak about him. He simply didn't have the tools and the resources to heal from a lot of pain over a long period of time. And when we see the topic of suicide through that window, then our ability and our desire to have compassion and to share that knowledge and perspective with others, that is where true change comes. Here's the truth. The topic of suicide does not care how old you are, how young you are, if you're male, if you're female, if you're rich or if you're poor, what side of the tracks that you live on, educated or not, what religion, what job, doesn't care. Every single person has risk factors and behaviors that are known to be associated with suicide. Every one of us. Some of us are just a little bit more of a high achiever. We all have that. So the idea that you could look at somebody and say, you know, that person's suicidal, that person would never be, is a facade that we can't afford to hold on to. As we go through what QPR is, what I want to really emphasize to you is that we're going to explore risk factors and behaviors, and that each of these things that we explore should be treated as clues. So we've all played the game of Clue, and you have to pay attention to what's going on in the game. Apply that to life. Apply that to the people in your life. Pay attention to the clues. And I don't care how small they are. In fact, the person who tells you, you know what, that wasn't really an attempt at suicide, they're just trying to get attention. Anybody ever hear that? Maybe even say it? They're just seeking attention. I would challenge that thought. Who would go that far to get attention who was not experiencing some form of psychological distress? So any level of psychological distress that would lead somebody to use that type of phrase or action probably needs help. That's not the way that any of us would want to be living, or somebody that we love or care about, or even a complete stranger to live. If you're experiencing any level of psychological pain, we all should be striving to get help. So I don't care how diminished it seems, all clues matter. Am I going? There we are. A couple of different ways that we're going to receive clues from the people around us. Direct clues that we can listen for are going to sound something like, I just wish that I was dead, which is a pretty blasé, I just wish I was dead, right? Sometimes just the tone in the voice will say something a little bit more severe. I should just end it all. This next one, I call this one the Russian roulette. If such and such doesn't happen, and that's the wrong phrasing up there, by the way, I still haven't fixed it. Because now what we're doing is we're putting our life on the line for a particular outcome that we may not have any decision in how that plays out. You know, the best thing would happen is if I just die, if a bus would just hit me. And these are things that you guys know that you've heard at some point, even if only on TV. And I should just, and then they actually fill in the blank with what method they would use. Now, some of these are obviously more severe and direct, and tone of voice can play a big part in that. But these are more direct ways of actually putting this out there. Others might be, it'd just be easier on everyone if I just wasn't here. You know what, you'd be better off if I wasn't here. Don't jump to conclusion to think that that's a suicidal statement, but do ask, what do you mean? What does not being here mean? It'd be better if I just moved out. It'd be better if I just didn't even live here in town so close to you. It'd be better if I just didn't even work here anymore. Get curious. Don't judge and don't assume that you know what that means. I'm just tired of being a burden on everybody. No matter what I do, I can't do anything right. You know, nobody would even care if I wasn't here anymore. I could be gone. Nobody would even notice. You know what? Just forget about it. Pretty soon I won't even be here. I won't even be a bother for you anymore. Just forget it. Or more of the passive aggressive, you wouldn't even care if I wasn't here. Like you'd even care. It wouldn't make any difference. In any of those circumstances, depending upon your exposure to the challenge that that person has been facing and how it may have imposed on your own life, how it's affected you, you could easily become defensive, become angry, judgmental, make assumptions of what they're trying to communicate. The one that I used very frequently, which is kind of interesting because I'm afraid of heights, but I used to say, I just need to find a tall tree and a short rope. And that was my way of saying, I've just hit my limit. It never occurred to me what I was really communicating. So sometimes we're not always completely direct in our communication. In fact, 7 out of 10 individuals who have suicidal thought verbally communicate that. So what about the other 3? In my case, what I just shared with you was the closest thing that I ever said in conveying this level of psychological pain. I never said anything about the idea of suicide or wanting to die. That doesn't mean I hadn't been thinking about it, but I never communicated it to anybody because people who are suicidal are weak and selfish, and I didn't want to be that person, and so I wouldn't say anything, and I would just keep moving forward because I was going to be stronger than that. So we need to be mindful not only of what we hear, but also what we see. There are certain risk factors, and there's various types of risk factors. Some of them are going to be geographic, some of them are going to be genetic, some of them are going to be experiences that we've had, social experiences and so forth. So again, you can go down the list of risk factors and even the behaviors, and you're going to realize that you could check mark some of these in your own personal life. That doesn't mean that you've been suicidal. Now, as you take a look at the risk factors, I want to share with you a little story because I think that it demonstrates how we cannot make any assumptions. I am one of a unique number of children. Why I say that is I was raised with being the oldest. I have a half-brother who is my brother. I have a half-sister who's my sister. This whole half and step thing doesn't make any sense to me. I have a stepbrother and a stepsister that I know of. And my brother and my sister, we grew up in the exact same environment. What I didn't know at the time of my attempt, or even when my ideation started at the age of 14, was that the experiences, these risk factors and these behaviors that I had and that I was forming would have put a check mark at the age of 27 next to about 80% of these. And at the time of my initial thoughts, my first hospitalization, I think I was 19. At that time, I had already experienced almost all of that 80%. And when I share with you that I have this brother and sister that we grew up in the same home, that would convey that they grew up with the exact same risk factors and behaviors. Here's the interesting thing. I have survived multiple attempts, not for a long, long, long time, and I'm so thankful and grateful to the family and the friends and the therapists and everybody who have helped me get to where I am today, and to the younger version of myself, because she took a pretty big beating to help me be who I am. I often talk about her in the third person because I think that she deserves her own identity. And I do that intentionally, just in case you were wondering. I didn't know what I didn't know. My brother and sister didn't know what they didn't know. And what you'll realize if you look at this list, and if you're at all familiar with the criminal justice system and a number of other social challenges that we face, is that these same risk factors and behaviors contribute toward unlawful behavior, drug and alcohol addiction, ways of using our bodies that are not intended to be shared. All of these things, it's almost a mirror to what you see here. My brother has never once had the thought of suicide. And my sister and I think even my brother would agree, he had the worst of what we grew up with. How is that? I don't know how he can do that. But he did have run-ins with the law, starting when he was only 14 years old and trying to figure out how to live outside of our home, and then being brought back. My sister, almost 10 years younger than I am, I adopted when she was 16, I was almost 25, struggled for many years with alcohol and drug addiction. And in order to be able to fill those needs, found men who were willing to provide them. You have 3 different people experiencing the exact same environment, very different engagements. And just so you know, they both know that I talk about our story. My 2 sons grew up in the same home with this amazing mom. I should introduce you to her. And they've both responded to life very differently. They both had thoughts of suicide. My younger son, 24 years old, I didn't even know until maybe 6 years ago that when he was in 5th grade, he had an entire plan of how he was going to get rid of that pain. I had no idea. How could I not know that? I had been there. My now 27-year-old, I always had worried, and I always thought it was my fault. And it wasn't my fault. And I'm thankful that they're both here today. But the difference between my older son and my younger son is that my older son, his attempt happened before my friend died and I got educated. And my younger son, we started talking. For the first time since they were 4 and 6 years old, we talked about an attempt that almost cost them their mother's life and why. So when my younger son had those thoughts, who do you think he called? And the number one thing that I said to him is, where's your firearm? What's the number one thing on my list? Access to lethal means. We had already talked about a safety plan, not because we thought that that day would ever happen, but because we didn't know if it would. This topic isn't one that you talk about because there's a problem. This topic is a topic you talk about because it is a part of life. And because the things that we're talking about right now in QPR This is not a process to be able to save somebody's life because they are in crisis. This is a process that we should be talking about and using because it's just good life skills. And while there's a lot of different risk factors and behaviors that are associated, it's also really important that we end up understanding how they come together and how they work within the brain. And a lot of what I'm sharing with you right now has nothing to do with QPR. It's just an undereducated, learn by walking the road of life, who's sharing my experiences and those that I've received from others around me that have walked a similar journey. And for some of you, what I'm sharing, it probably sounds very close to your own story, which is why it is so important that we talk about it. So I'm just going to run through a couple of these. Changes in relationships are one of the biggest influences because change is naturally difficult, but also when you feel like that change had nothing to do with a choice and you didn't have an opportunity to actually prepare for it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a change in a relationship because you had a breakup. It could be that you had a mental health provider that ended up moving outside of your plan, or that your best friend and their spouse and family moved because of a job, or that you now have to move because of a job, and your central support system is no longer right there. Changes in relationships come in a lot of different forms, and sometimes we get too narrow in how we would refer to these things. Change in any type can be difficult, but especially when it comes to people who we trust. Those relationships, thank goodness that we do have the ability to be connected online, that we can still connect even when we're far apart. Chronic physical pain, I had no idea. It was one of those check marks that I didn't have. I was like so excited and wanting to preserve all of my little check mark boxes that were still empty. And then I ended up with a serious back injury for which, thankfully, medical science has given me the opportunity to walk on two legs, and I am grateful. But I had no idea the influence that chronic pain causes on the psyche. Oh my goodness, it changed. And sometimes I think that the experiences that we have are just so that we can be more empathetic and understanding of the people around us that may be going through that in the future. There are so many different considerations, and what I want you to do is I want you to take a checklist of yourself and take the time to do these checklists with your friends and family, because these checklists, they change. They change all the time in our own lives and in the lives of the people around us. But unless we're exposed to a list, we don't even know. I'm going to pick on you. I'm sorry that I am going to do this. If a woman has breast cancer, or if a woman is afraid that she could end up with breast cancer, what can she do to find out if she has breast cancer and to ward off the risk of it being fatal? Have a mammogram. Now, there are a lot of women in this room that I could have asked that same question. I would expect that we would all know as women what to do. But we have a man here who knows how to protect the female anatomy, and most people don't know that this list exists. And yet, every single one of us can be affected by suicide. I found this list because I lost a friend. You have the list now. Here's more. You can look this list up. You can go on my website. I think you guys all have my business card, but you can go to just about any website that deals with the topic of suicide, and you'll find a complete list. Go down it. Check the items that you've been affected by. Share that list and go through it with friends and family. Just be aware. The reality is, if you're a woman, you know that you could have a risk for breast cancer. If you're a man, you have a less risk, but you know that that can happen too. And because you know that, you can do something about it. Know the list. Know where you fit within it. If you have a family member who's had breast cancer, you know your risk is higher. If you have a lot of check marks, you know your risk is higher. Make sense? Knowledge, it's power. Now, risk factors are things that basically, those are influences that you don't necessarily always outwardly see. Behaviors, on the other hand, are. Risk factors can be caused by a number of contributing outside influences, and sometimes it's genetics, right? Behaviors are those actionables. Quite often, it's the behaviors that we notice without giving consideration to the risk factors that led to the behavior. Make sense? If there's a child acting up consistently in a classroom, the teacher and the peers notice the behavior. They may not always know what risk factors are going on behind the scenes that is leading to that behavior. So if you see any number of these behaviors in anybody, that's where we get to not judge, but get curious about what experiences that they've had that have allowed them to end up in a situation where this became a behavior that was expressed. Make sense? Does anybody have any questions at this point on risk factors and behaviors?
Could I go back to the slide where you talked about fearlessness in facing death at a good point? Have you ever heard of this? An acquaintance of mine had ideation a lot, according to him, but frankly was just too afraid of dying to attempt it. Have you ever heard of that?
Absolutely. So the question was, am I aware of individuals who have had thoughts, chronic thoughts of suicide, but was too afraid to make an attempt? As with life, there are degrees, okay? And there are phases of suicide. So there's the initial ideation, which is just the thought that doesn't even reoccur, okay? And then there is where you can end up beginning to have that reoccurrence, but it's here and there, and then it can ramp up to much more thought, to a point where you begin to consider method, how you would do it. And there are individuals that will actually go all the way through a complete plan and never take action. And I think that that's what you're referring to. Somewhere here and here is where your friend was. And because I've worked with literally hundreds of individuals beyond just myself, in the study that I've done, Dr. Joyner speaks to the point of when you are in the point of being alone and feeling like you're a burden, you're somewhere in those first two major phases. Fearlessness is required because you have to be willing to take on whatever the consequence is. And I will say spirituality is a significant factor for why people never follow through, even if they know exactly how they would do it. So it's not always necessarily that they wouldn't want to experience the physical pain that could happen. It can also be a spiritual. It can also be the commitment that they feel that they have to a loved one that they would not want to leave in that kind of pain, and the clarity that they have enough to realize how that would impact. And so they may choose to live even though they don't desire to live for the sake of somebody else. And so that is actually, when I was working with individuals a lot who were suicidal, one of the first questions that I would ask, and that we're going to get into here, is who is really important to you? Who's the one person that matters more to you than any? Because if we can identify that there is some level of connection to someone that they trust and that they also care about, then that can be a significant line of hope for us to be able to utilize in getting them to a point of feeling that they're going to be okay. I would also share that if the ideation continues, even with that fear, making sure that they are receiving the help that they need is so important, because, well, fear of leaving somebody behind or what might happen in another life or whatever the case might be can be a huge protective factor. depending upon a circumstance that could happen, that could end up shifting. And so we want to be mindful that the healing of that psychological pain still exists, or else those thoughts would not have persisted. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, and one of the things I think is probably most important in that healing phase is working and speaking with other people who have experienced something similar. Because it is very difficult to have those thoughts, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience, but also what others have shared. Quite often, you try to share this, and we end up with a lot of the platitudes that it's not a big deal, you'll be fine, or just, suck it up, be stronger than this. And a big part of that is just simply that they don't understand what's going on inside of here. And so I'm going to get into that a little bit, because I think that helping even those who have never had the thought of suicide understand what it looks like and what it feels like is really important. And it's not talked about, at least not in ways that we can process it. It's always usually in more of a heightened state of mind. So thank you for that question, though. It's a really good one. Any other questions? Actually, I've covered a lot of topic, and maybe this is an opportunity for us to get some questions in. And we'll have more of that opportunity here shortly, too. Good. Thank you. So risk factors and behaviors are something we have to look at, but when I was saying that all of this that's going on inside of the mind, it's really, really hard to be able to understand it if we know somebody who's been there. What I believe happens, and I'll describe to you what suicide ideation is for me. And I have what's called reoccurring ideation, which means that I have episodes where I will have those thoughts at this point in my life, and I hope for the rest of my life. I recognize them, I have resources around me, I talk about it, and I'm able to de-escalate that pretty quick. And also my family and friends are educated now, so they know what to see if it's just in behaviors, that they'll call me out on it. And I'm getting a lot better at not saying, no, that's not what it is. When you look at that list of risk factors and behaviors, and you start doing your own little checklist of what you've been affected by, and whether you've ever had thoughts of suicide or not, I think it's important that every person do this, and that we do it regularly, at least once a year. Because life changes a lot in 1 year, right? So you do your little checklist, but then I'm going to encourage you to do a rating system, including if you're working with somebody, a family member, a friend, somebody at work, whatever the case might be, to help identify the level of pain that is being experienced. Okay? The severity of pain. And we'll use a scale of 1 to 4. Okay? Now I'm gonna put the 4s out there right now and say that if you give a 4 is it's never been something that the person has been experiencing, that they've ever done, that they've ever been affected by. So for example, one risk factor to suicidal thought is not having earned a diploma from high school. It's a pretty significant risk factor, actually. Another significant risk factor is being in a very high level of success or influence. Isn't that interesting? Being up here or being here. And that all has to do with, am I going to end up letting anybody down? Or do they already think that I don't matter? Again, perception. So a 4 means that it doesn't even, that's your safe little checkbox that doesn't exist, right? There's no check in it. Those are all 4s. But then 1 through 3, this is where we really look at the level of severity. A 3 is that you did experience or you have behaved in this particular way at some point. But through time, through treatment, through whatever it has been, that pain no longer causes a disturbance in the way that you think and feel about yourself. So I call the 3s past pain. Okay? They're in the past. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means that it doesn't hurt you anymore. The 2s are what I call situational pain. And it kind of makes sense that if you've had an exposure to a particular risk factor or you've behaved in a certain way, but that pain or that behavior doesn't happen all the time anymore because you're getting a little bit better at managing it, then it would be situational, the influence that that particular risk factor or behavior has on you now. And the 1s, that's our chronic pain. And chronic pain doesn't have a timeline, just as situational pain or past pain doesn't. It just means that that pain is always here. And trying to manage it is quite difficult. It takes concerted effort to de-escalate where that pain's at. So again, 1 is chronic pain, 2 is situational pain, 3 is past pain, and 4 is we hope that we never have to know the pain associated with it because we haven't experienced it to date. Does this make sense? So let me show you what this might look like then. If you were bullied or harassed, or you bullied or harassed somebody else at some point in your life, you might have a 3 because maybe that was when you were in grade school and you've healed from it and you really don't care about whoever it was that was doing those things, or you were able to heal from it because you had a reconciliation. A change in a close relationship, such as a child who has been adopted, is at a 10% higher increase of suicide ideation and loss of life than a child who grows up and lives with their natural-born parents. And maybe that not understanding why they were adopted, not that they don't have the love of a family that does love them, but why they were abandoned in that relationship from the paternal family, maybe that still hurts. Or they just went through a divorce, or whatever. So maybe that's a 1 because it hurts really bad right now and I haven't healed from it. Chronic physical pain, if you've never had it, may not be a consideration. Go down to a death of a family member or a beloved pet, you might have had a really close relationship with somebody. I had a wonderful relationship with my grandparents. It's been almost 9 and 20 years since I lost each one of them. And I would say I still experience situational pain because I still today miss them. But that pain, it's very, very, very little. Actually, we could almost put that in a past pain because now I just love talking about them. Would you guys like to hear about my grandmother's gnocchi and her talking in Italian? Just kidding. They are great stories, though. So when we're able to take what our experiences have been and what our behaviors are, and we can get honest about that and encourage others to do it as well, that sometimes isn't enough. I think that what we need to do is actually understand the severity of each one of those points, because the suicidal mind, this is for me, it is like, I compare it to 2 things, and it kind of depends on where my mind is at that moment. Number 1, it is like being pushed under the deepest body of water. I cannot breathe, and it's so dark that I'm not sure which direction I should even turn so that I can make an effort to hit the surface. Because I could be swimming and swimming and swimming and going deeper down. My mind is so clouded, I cannot see outside of that pain. And just when I hit the surface and I go to take a breath, I get pushed back down. And even as I tell you that that's what it feels like, my throat tightens up and I can feel my heart rate begin to go up. That's the effect that even right now when I'm having a wonderful time with all of you, I can associate with what it feels like to me that much. And it's a terrible, terrible place to be. And in that moment, it is very difficult for me to be able to tell you which of 20 different things I've experienced or that I'm behaving like is hurting me the most. I'm just trying to figure out how to get above the water and to stay up there. So doing an exercise like this ahead of time, again, talk about this before it's a crisis. That's a powerful acknowledgement to help prevent unnecessary pain or elevated pain. My other example is, we all know what a kaleidoscope is, especially when we were kids. You turn it and the little trinkety things, they turn. My little 4-year-old nephew, he loves his little kaleidoscopes I got him. Life for me, quite often, is a beautiful kaleidoscope, but then something will end up happening that will trigger those thoughts, and it's kind of like the perfect image, and then all you do is barely move, and it just falls apart. And you know that you're never going to get that moment back. And you can keep turning and turning and turning, but it never comes back. And the frustration. That is my best way of being able to describe in a word story, word pictures, what it's like to be in that state of mind. Checking my time.
I'm going to interrupt for just a moment if I could.
Can I sit down and be the audience?
You can. Deidre didn't know I was going to do this, but I, as a pastor, just want to speak pastorally to this for just a moment. She's not a pastor. I'm not expecting her to act like a pastor. I don't want her to act like a pastor. I want
That's too much pressure.
Let us do that. I really value the things she's brought you, and I want to just connect it to a pastoral thought here, and that is that it's so important for us to understand that the person who is in the suicidal state is not necessarily thinking squarely, not necessarily able to put their thoughts in their head together, not necessarily saying, I'd like to go to hell. Because there are certain people out there who make the assumption that if I were to end up having gone through the situation of having suicided, that I would have planned myself to be separated from God. And so far from the truth for so many of the individuals that are in this mental state where they do not know mentally what they're doing. They are not in a place where they can wrap together truths and understand them and squarely see anything. So I'm going to tell you a case because it'll help you understand where I'm coming from with this. I know an individual who I can tell you is a beautiful child of God. I'm talking about someone who has led God's church in teaching others, who has been out with people telling others about Jesus, who has helped other people in stress and in problems, who she talked about, Deidre talked about 80% of the list, she could check them all off. Another case just like that, the whole list of things. As I looked at her list, I said, yep, that was this, that one. I could go right down the list and say, yep, this individual had a whole stack of them. And this individual had a mental illness that we didn't know the individual had, now diagnosed. And God put me in a situation to be there when this person was suiciding, when in the process, with a high-powered rifle to the temple, and God used me to stop it. And today this person is getting help, right back, acting like a child of God acts, so thankful to be alive, so ready to help other people, and has no plan to walk away from God. Never did. Never did. I'm absolutely confident that had it happened that day, this person would have been in heaven. And I just want to have said that really loudly for everyone to get it. And I'll be glad to answer questions about that privately to anybody who struggles with this, but I think it's really important that our people understand we do not want to equate suicidal ideation or having finally succumbed to the struggle of this with I wanted to do it.
Thank you, an incredibly important message. Thank you. I will, on a personal note, share with you, and then I do want to hear your question. At the time of my attempt 20 years ago, I was praying the entire time. The entire time. And I don't think that I understood I don't think that I understood in my prayers, because it wasn't for me to be found or to live. But that connection for me, that spiritual connection, never subsided. And I too believe that my friend Perk, like so many that I know have lost their life to suicide, have a very, very hard time comprehending the idea that a loving God, in a time when the brain is not functioning to make that kind of a decision, would turn their child away. So that's my 2 cents. But thank you, because I think it is so important that we hear that. You had a question?
Yes, just what was your rating scale again? Like, what was 1 and what was 2?
Yeah, I'm glad to go through the rating scale. No, absolutely. So it's a 4-point scale. 4 is for a risk factor or behavior that you have never experienced or that you have never acted on. Okay, so in this particular case on the screen, this person would have never had chronic physical pain or a terminal illness, and they also would have graduated from high school, because there's no effect associated with having not graduated. The number 3 rating is an individual who did experience one of those risk factors or behaviors, may even be going through it now, but the pain associated quite often with it is not present. So we would call that past pain. And the example up here would be being bullied or harassed, and the example I shared was somebody who perhaps that happened earlier in their life, they've healed from it, and it doesn't hurt them anymore. The 2 is the situational pain. So that is the pain that at one point caused them a significant amount of pain, but now only under certain circumstances. One thing that I can probably share is, because of my PTSD, there are some things that I think under most circumstances would have already fallen into a 3 that still will end up sometimes very unexpectedly deciding that they're going to cause me pain. And so because I'm able to heal and classify it a little bit quicker, I would consider most of those a 2, because it's situational. It's not that pain happening and then just completely taking over my life. Does that make sense? And then the rating of 1 is that chronic pain. And again, something can hurt significantly even years after being exposed to a risk factor or having a certain behavior. You can still be hurting for a very, very long time. Or it could have happened more recently, and that pain just isn't going away. It's always there right now. So it's probably good that we reviewed those really quick, just in case anybody else had missed them, so thank you. Now what I want to do is I actually want to make a shift and dive into QPR. And we're going to take each one of these as a step, recognizing that this is actually a process. And you kind of need to start with the first step before you go to the second step, before you go to the third step. Because if you want to get to our refer, and you do that right out of the box, then that concept of offering hope may not result in the outcome of them actually taking hold of that hope and that next step forward. So when I was talking about getting curious about a situation, QPR really feeds into that. The idea of questioning is where we have to not be judgmental. And so we can ask questions even if it's just behaviors that we're seeing, and we don't know the backstory of risk factors that may be at play. Does that make sense? So we can literally ask, have you been feeling sad? I feel like maybe you have, and I'm just wondering if what I'm picking up on, is there anything in particular that's been bringing you down? Remember how I talked about the gal who was worried about going into an interview and how she was going to be able to share? QPR is like that. It's a conversation. That's all it is. If you try to do it scripted, if you try to, while they're answering, you come up with your own next question, you're going to miss the whole point and the beauty of QPR. Because this applies if you've got kids or friends that are struggling and it has nothing to do with suicide. This is just good tools to have in your own personal toolbox of how to connect with people. You might ask, what specifically has been making things uncomfortable and difficult? You might know part of the problem, and so maybe you say, I know that you've been really worried about losing your job. You'd mention that. What specifically are you worried the most about in that? And it could be that somebody said something. It could be just the fear of not having that steady income. Or it could be the fear of looking like a failure to family members. So the surface very seldomly tells us what's really at the heart of what somebody's experiencing. So when we ask these questions, you don't have to narrow it down for them. Let them answer. Do you ever just wish that you could just go to sleep and never wake up? That's actually that's my go-to almost always. Almost always, that is my very first question when I see somebody who is in great stress. If I know even just a little bit about their circumstance. And because we've all been there, we don't have to make it about us, but we can certainly empathize and understand that. Or with everything that's happened, has it ever just made you feel like you can't do this anymore? And certainly there are cases when we know somebody's backstory. We can really understand why this would become almost too much. Asking them is okay. And then zip your lips and let them share. A more direct approach, and again, more questions, and a lot of times you're going to end up ebbing and flowing in these direct and indirect questions because conversations don't follow a specific flow of when to ask which question with which tone of voice. When people are as upset as you seem to be right now, sometimes they end up having thoughts that they just don't want to live anymore. And I'm just wondering if you've thought that way at all. You look, I'm not talking about physically, but you just look like you're miserable. Like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. For some people, when they are in that frame of mind, they actually end up having thoughts of suicide. I'm just wondering if you are. And it's okay to just be really, really direct. I'm just wondering, with everything that we've talked about, if you've had any thoughts of suicide. Now, I want to get you guys a little bit uncomfortable because if I can go from being failing dropout college student who didn't know how to give a speech and be up here now, I want to get you guys a little bit uncomfortable with me. Who here feels really comfortable saying the word suicide? Because I've said it like 50 times, maybe more if anybody's telling. At least we have one. So what I want to do is and you at home, you think I can't see you, but I can see you. You guys look. See. You guys see him, right? Hi. We're going to do this together. I want you to say the word suicide, and not because it's some kind of hokey little practice, but because until we get comfortable saying the word, this isn't going to do us any good because we're going to tap dance around it and we're never going to get to the heart of actually saying, are you thinking about suicide? I care about you. So, on the count of 3, we're going to say the word suicide. And it's going to feel so weird, both because you haven't said it probably very much at all, and because we're all doing it together. 1, 2, 3, suicide. Isn't that a weird sound coming out?
To me, it's more important to say the word depression, because so many people have a stigma about depression.
Mental illness in general.
You can control your feelings. And until I was sick for 2 months, never ever thought about depression, and finally Mayo Clinic gave me the diagnosis that I had depression. I was shocked and I cried for like 2 hours because finally someone said, this is what's wrong with you.
And I think that that's an excellent point, because again, 9 out of 10 individuals who die by suicide had a form of mental illness, and some of them didn't even realize it. I didn't know until 2 years ago that what I've been dealing with all of my life was bipolar. And I've been working in this line of work for the last 7 years, and I didn't know that. Of course, part of that is just a nice case of denial with a heavy scoop of reality when I finally actually went in for all the testing. It made so much more sense once I had the diagnosis, though, doesn't it?
It's easier for you to talk than to other people about it.
Yeah.
And you can pick up from people, you know, just in talking to some people, you can pick up little vibes that, oh, I went through this.
And it's so good sometimes just to talk with somebody who says, I get it. I've been there too. We'll get through this together. There's side note, not in the presentation. Get your pens ready. Are any of you familiar with Brené Brown? Lots of hands, lots of nodding. And if you're not, or if you're not familiar with the video I'm going to encourage you to watch, please write this down. Brené, B-R-E-N-E, Brown. Go on YouTube and look up the video, Empathy versus Sympathy, or it might be Sympathy versus Empathy. It's an animated video that explains that sympathy is when we feel for somebody's difficult situation. We feel badly for them. What is your name?
Pam.
Pam? What Pam is referring to is empathy, and that is when I can feel somebody else's pain because I know it, then that is feeling with somebody. So often I will talk even to staff members and I will say, I'm so thankful that I get to walk this journey with you. Whatever it is. I'm not walking the journey for them because I can't fix their journey. In fact, I'm going to tell you, this is how talking about QPR, this is how QPR works. I'm going to summarize it. When you guys are leaving here, you're going to be driving down the road and you're going to be thinking about this now. 2 cars on a freeway, both going the same direction. What happens if one of the cars decides to go into the lane that this one is in? Not good. QPR is a journey that you travel with somebody at their side, recognizing that they have their own lane. You cannot fix them. You can't. And if you try to, you're both going to end up in a bad situation. You can offer hope and resources and support, but allow them really the beauty of choice, of autonomy. Because this is their journey, it's not yours. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing when you empower somebody by allowing them to make decisions. Even if they're not the right decisions, they get to learn. And you get to be witness to growth that never would have potentially happened if they hadn't been introduced to the opportunity to choose, by giving them healthy choices and choosing which ones they feel comfortable moving forward with. Keep in your own lane. Keep in your lane. That was a hard one for me, especially as a parent. Okay, so questions. More direct approach. This is my own question. It's not part of QPR. But I believe that it is the best question. I might be a little biased, but there's 2 reasons. When you ask if you could end that psychological pain going on right now, and nobody was going to stop you, but you could end it, how would you do it? All that pain, that buzz, that I'm underwater sinking, if you could end it right now, what would you do to end it? Somebody who is not suicidal will say, I think I just want to go take a nap. I think I just need to go for a run it off. They'll come up with whatever their actionable is going to be, and it won't be associated with suicide. Somebody who is suicidal will likely identify in one way or another one of those statements that indicates that they are having suicidal thoughts. And because you ask them, how would you do it, they're likely going to give you some insight to the method that they would use. So if somebody says something and they describe how they would end that pain that would cause self-inflicted harm, you both know that that is one option. Keeping in mind that there are a lot of options, they've just named one, so HOPE is recognizing that there's more than one option to decreasing that pain. And it's helped you identify what might be a step down the line after this conversation or during the conversation to remove that method from their reach. Does that make sense? Because if you remember, one of the major risk factors was having access to lethal means. So if we can identify what that means is, and then protect them by creating space, that's going to go a long way. So, anybody need that question up there longer? At home? Everybody good? Okay. Just, if you could end your psychological pain, how would you do it? Okay. Because this isn't an easy conversation, you can know how to be able to do QPR, and it doesn't mean that you're always going to be the best person to do it. In fact, if you ever are in a situation where somebody has a firearm and you believe them to be suicidal, that is the one time when you forget everything I'm telling you about QPR. You tell them that you love them, you care about them. I'll be right back. Please don't do anything. I'll be right back. And you leave. Because in that instance, not only could that individual end up doing something that you will never be able to get out of your mind, but they also could end up harming you. And if you were to die, now they have to explain, even if that wasn't their intention. So if you do find somebody with a firearm, please, please, please put QPR on the shelf, call 911, and let people who are trained. And the time that it'll be the hardest ever to do that is if you actually walk in and you come in contact with somebody that is a close love to you. As Pastor Phil said, you really need to have the skills and be prepared for that type of a scenario. And you need to be calling those who can bring that to the table, such as Pastor Phil, EMTs, and so forth.
This is a separate question from online. Is anorexia nervosa a slow method of suicide?
That's a really great question. Yeah, thank you so much for our online viewers. So first I'm going to share with you that anorexia as well as bulimia are both within the realm of mental illness. It is an unhealthy coping mechanism for psychological pain, and it can it most often is the result of many of the risk factors and behaviors that we saw associated. I actually struggled with both during my high school years from 14 to 18 when I joined the military, and I had no idea why it was so important to me to be able to control one thing in my life, but ultimately that is what the cause of that behavior was just having one thing that I got to choose, even if it was unhealthy. Any action that you take, in answer to your question, any action that you take that can cause a slow progression of your wellness could be deemed life-threatening, obviously, but most individuals who are experiencing some form of eating disorder, it is about the control of the now, not necessarily that I will starve myself until I die. That doesn't mean that there isn't the thought that if I just deplete and don't allow myself to eat that I will die, but it doesn't mean that it is either. Eating disorders, as are many other behaviors that are unhealthy, have much more to do with the mind trying to process this desire to have some sense of control in our own lives. And that's a normal, healthy part of brain development, is to have choice in our lives. When we feel like we don't, then sometimes we end up choosing unhealthy behaviors so that at least we have a sense and assembly of that we got to choose it. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I would say that it really comes down to the intent and into the discussion. I do know a young lady who is doing very well now, that there were a few times that her family and my family thought that we were going to lose her. And she's one of my sweetest, having her in my life, and actually her friends and my husband and I are very, very good friends. It was very difficult to see her go through that. And I do know that there were times when she was suicidal, but those were actually for her two different things. And because I'm not only are you not going to leave here, doctors, I am not either. I would really defer that almost more so to a clinician, but that's my understanding on that topic, and I hope that it's helpful. Any other questions? Okay. So again, if you don't feel comfortable asking somebody if they're suicidal, please find somebody who can. Okay? And if it starts out, Pam said, start out even with the question, are you feeling a sense of depression or hopelessness? Start somewhere. And in that conversation, when you're really dialed into just simply getting curious and allowing them to explore, that's when you can more deeply understand where their thought process is. So I want to demonstrate something for you that, again, isn't part of the QPR Institute process for QPR, but it's just a method that I've used, and it really, really goes to the heart of that personal connection. Number one, you need to understand that QPR really emphasizes the idea that we have one mouth, two ears. You have to be listening far more than speaking. And don't be looking to give an answer or a redirect while they're answering. In fact, take some time to even repeat, if I understand right. Now, I'll also share, and this is kind of a sidebar. When you're around a little baby or a puppy or whatever the case might be, you guys, men included, our voices go up in pitch. They just naturally do, okay? And it's a softer tone that we use. I bring that up because it's really important that when you're dealing with somebody who is in crisis, you have to recognize that whatever you put out is going to amplify or diminish that anxious pain that's going on. So it's really important that you stay calm and that you use that softer tone. Now, for most women, we already have a softer tone in our voice, right? Guys, your voices change, they get deep. Our voices don't really go through that. So it's really important that you take the time to be present and to take whatever you've got in you to remain calm, so that that mirroring action isn't you mirroring them, but that they have the opportunity to mirror your calm. Does that make sense? The whole idea that it takes two to tango? Okay. So again, we're not going to answer the question for them. I want to get into what this means. If I say, actually, Phil, can you come up, because I know you're okay with me like shaking the hand and talking and so forth. We're going to sit up here for a minute. I'm going to actually demonstrate this. And hopefully the camera can still see us, yes? Come sit. We're going to have story time now, all of you children. If you would just come, I'm kidding. So when you're going through this conversation, it is important that that idea of connection be present. And as you're asking questions, it's important that the person feels that you're actually engaged in the conversation, that this is between the two of you, they're not being talked at, but that they are having a conversation with. Does that make sense? Okay. So what could end up happening is I would say, Phil, I know that you've been struggling, and I'm wondering if you've been having thoughts of suicide. And Phil doesn't necessarily want to answer that question. That's a difficult question to be asked. And so he just kind of sits there and ignores me and tries to pretend like I'm not here. Can you guys imagine anybody being able to pretend like I'm not here? And so in that silence, it only takes, with a really uncomfortable question like that, it only takes about 3 seconds of complete silence before you're going to start feeling uncomfortable. You go 5 seconds and that's an eternity. So what do most of us do? We start to talk. So then I would say, because, it's okay if you feel that way. A lot of people do. And I just want you to know that I'm here for you.
Thank you.
And he says, thank you, as a very nice gentleman would. Except for that, what happened?
You let me off the hook.
He got off the hook. He never even had to answer the question. And I felt really good because I asked him the question and I told him I'm here for him. Break, you go your way, I go my way, life goes on, and then Phil goes back to feeling like he really is on his own. Make sense? Not the best way to ask the question. Secondly, you do want to make sure that you give enough time. And in that uncomfortable silence, because we want to be able to feel like we're not just sitting here waiting and not knowing what to do, and okay, give that little bit of time and then lean forward with a hand on the knee or hand on the shoulder. That touch, that little subtle touch, is the connectedness that our brain needs. There's a research done in, I think, the 1940s over in Russia with babies in an orphanage. And they actually studied baby A, who gets physical touch, fed, pampered, at that time it was probably cloth diapers, all of those things, comparing the brain development to baby B, who does not, who gets changed. It is a bottle that is basically held, but there's no physical contact. Look it up. It's profound what they found in these little infants in brain development. This is immense in the brain making connection with that person. And as you do that, you simply say, Phil, it's okay. I'm not in a hurry. Take your time. I'm here.
And what I'm going to say next isn't real, okay? So don't put it out on Facebook that Phil just told you this about his family. My wife has cancer. My father is dying. And I'm just really, really struggling with one of my kids right now.
Wow. That's a lot. That had to be difficult even to say.
I'm really, really feeling the weight of it, and just, I feel like there's I'm kind of feeling like I'm trapped and there's just no way out.
In that trap, oh my goodness, I can only imagine. There's a lot of people who in your situation would be looking for any way out. I mean, to the point of even considering suicide. I mean, have you had any thoughts of suicide or?
Well, I've thought once in a while that it'd be nice just to let God just let me go to sleep and not wake up tomorrow. I've struggled with that a little bit.
I think I can appreciate that. You mentioned things going on with your family. Right now, who's the person that you know that you have available for you that you can turn to, that you can trust, that you can talk with about these things?
I would usually say my wife, but because she's suffering herself, I don't feel like I can give her another burden right now.
Yeah.
So I guess I'd have to say a close friend I have.
And what's your friend's name?
Pastor.
Pastor.
My pastor.
Your pastor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I really appreciate that you're even sharing this with me because these are heavy things, and my heart and my being, I want you to know that I am so thankful and grateful, and I am here for you. And your friend, I was thinking if we were to call him right now, does he know the situation, all of these circumstances that you're up against?
He knows the majority of them.
The majority of them?
He knows the majority of them.
If we were to call him right now, do you think that he'd just, at least have a conversation with us on the phone, or if available, even come and join us?
He would.
Yeah, let's do that,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Yeah, I trust him that much. I would do that.
Okay. And then maybe we can kind of talk through what resources and support we have here in the community with him, with me, and others that you don't have to walk this journey alone, because this is not a journey to be walked alone at all. And not for you, not for your wife, not even for your son that's going through some difficult times. But for right now, let's look at what we can do to help you feel like this isn't so overwhelming.
Thank you. Feels really good to know that you care.
And I do.
I do.
Thank you.
But I feel that you do. And I think that's great for them to be able to see that it's a real in you. So thank you.
Thanks. So what we just did actually, and I appreciate that you came up and that we were able to walk through that, we got ourselves a little bit ahead of what we're going to talk about with the QPR, because we went through the question, the persuade, and the next step would have been the referral. But you see how that was a conversation? That's all you're doing. You're just having a conversation. And it's not uncommon that if you ask somebody this very important question of whether or not they're having thoughts of suicide, or do they wish that they could just go to sleep and never wake up again, or whatever the case might be, for somebody to go into their shell and not feel comfortable giving you that answer. Think about this. If you're having these thoughts and you've never actually verbalized them to anybody, and somebody now asks you, with the stigma around this topic and your belief that you have to be strong, otherwise you would have already talked to somebody about it on your own, how comfortable are you to say, yeah, as a matter of fact, and I'd like to talk to you about it? Probably not going to happen, right? So you have to get comfortable in the silence. And that little reach out on the shoulder, on the knee, to say, it's okay. We're not in a rush here. I'm not going anywhere. Take your time. You could literally be there for 5 or 10 minutes, and both of you would know that that was okay. I want you to encourage hope however you possibly can. And so this is where we're going to ask those questions so that we can learn what matters. Because if we don't have something to hold on to that matters, it becomes very, very difficult for us to take the concept of hope and have it apply to us. So simple questions like, what's the one thing that brings you a level of joy? And then let them answer. Who's the most important person in your life? Which was similar to the question that I asked. When you're really struggling, who do you usually talk to? I'm happy, I'm honored to be here right now. But who is that person that you usually do talk to? Which again is a little bit along the lines of what I asked. This next one I really love because it leaves the door open to really understand what's causing the psychological pain, but it's a twist on how you ask the question. So instead of saying, what has you down, you ask, right now, what is missing? In your life, what is missing? And in Pastor Phil's example, he likely would have said, calm, peace. Which allows you then to better understand the things that are causing that psychological pain. But instead of trying to do it on a little checklist, it's in his words based on his circumstance and where he is right now. And this last question is one of my absolute favorites. And that is, in the past, when you have faced insurmountable odds, and we all have, let's be honest, is there a single one of us that isn't a survivor? I get up here and I tell you that I'm a suicide attempt survivor. That doesn't make me special. Doesn't even make me unique. We are all survivors of this thing called life. The fact is that we're here right now. And so it's really important that we recognize that survivor within each of us. And if we can help somebody understand what they have done in the past that helped them get through a difficult situation by asking, in the past when you've been up against insurmountable odds, what did you do then that helped? Then we have a little bit of an insight as to something that we could do right now that we know already works for them. And how do you ensure what the next best step is to take? You'll look at what's worked in the past and you implement it. And that's true with all of the adversities that we face in life. We usually tap into whatever has worked for us, and in some cases, it's unhealthy behaviors. I mean, think about it. The first time that you ever had your very first beverage, whether you're an alcoholic or not, that first beverage didn't make you an alcoholic. It was curiosity. You tried something. You wanted to break a couple rules, whatever the case might be, right? And then in time, it became something that was beyond which you could manage. And so somebody who drinks a lot and falls into the challenge of alcoholism, that's a coping mechanism. I'm not saying it's a healthy one, but that's a coping mechanism. The individual that we had the question come through on anorexia, nervosa, that is a coping mechanism. There's a lot of other things that go into those. But when you recognize that, we might not encourage that the person go ahead and hit the bar, or here, I'm going to pop a beer for you, but we recognize that that's something that they're using, and sometimes coping mechanisms are the only thing that we have right now to have that sense of hope. Because even with the unhealthy behaviors, it's gotten us to where we are today, which means that we still have the now to begin something that could be better, could give us that relief without the added pain that comes from the negative coping mechanisms that we might be using. Does that make sense? So just because somebody is doing something that we might not think is the best thing for them to do, and it could actually truly be not healthy or good for them, doesn't mean that we can't recognize that it is a coping mechanism and it has helped you to get to here. Which means that you've had the time to be able to learn, and now we have an opportunity to be able to explore additional coping mechanisms. I'm not saying that you would throw that in as a part of this conversation. I just want to reframe the answer that might come forward, because it might not be, I'm going to go for a healthy run. I actually know individuals that use running as a coping mechanism and have destroyed their bodies because they run until their bodies can't handle it, but that's how they've coped. So sometimes even what we consider to be a healthy coping mechanism by society standards can end up not necessarily being good. Everything, as my grandfather used to say, everything in moderation. I hear you. But ask, what do you usually do? Because there may be a little nugget in that that's going to help us be able to grab back onto hope. Here's the questions we are not going to ask. You're not thinking about doing something crazy or stupid, are you? Don't you just feel the empathy? Why don't you just get over it already? Let me give you a hug after I've just made you feel less than. You were just kidding when you said that you wanted to die, right? I mean, that was just a joke. And let me tell you, there are those of us who have said that exact thing. And the reality is, that question isn't even for the sake of the person we're talking to. That's the question that we ask when we're afraid that they might actually say yes. Because if we can laugh it off, then maybe my fear of not knowing what to do won't have to actually step up and do something. And don't you think that you're being kind of selfish in thinking, just about yourself instead of what that would do to everybody else? So I'm going to go back into story mode. Eventually I'm going to say the end and you guys get to go home. So going back to my own experience, one of the officers who found me had already, in some way or another, learned that I had 2 young children. And so the officer says to me, you need to calm down. You need to let us help you. You have your children that you need to fight for. Here's what that did to me. My attempt was for my children. The prayers I was saying was for God to help my children live the life they deserved that I was going to keep them from being able to have. Those were my prayers. That was the most significant reason why I believed I could not continue on with this life. Do not assume that you understand why somebody would or would not take action. Because what it did to me is I doubled down, and it took 4 police officers in what was a much smaller body than this one at the time in order to be able to get me the help that I needed. The assumption that we understand that what we value is what that person would value. What is important to us is important to them. What we think should be a factor for them to fight for is being processed in their mind the way that we are right in that moment. We are consciously, mindfully present with a mind that is not playing against us. They are not. So here we are today, and I'm thinking back to those years ago, that if I would have been the person who came to help me, it makes all the sense in the world that I could have said, but what about your children? Except for that I remember what it was to be the mother who didn't know how to be what she thought she was supposed to be. And that idea of being selfish, suicide usually isn't a selfish act. It's the last act that somebody believes they can put forth to spare somebody else what they believe they have brought on as a burden. So helping them understand how they have gotten through difficult times in the past, who they love to have in their life, what they enjoy, who they normally would talk to in a difficult situation is so important to help them focus in on things that we can now use to move that conversation forward. So the truth is, suicide isn't the problem. And you guys have heard this, that it's only the solution to what somebody perceives as an unsolvable problem. But the reality is, we're not there to fix the problem. We're there to simply give them a line of hope. And hope comes from what they perceive to be worth investing hope in, not what we believe that we should present and force upon them. The young lady I was talking about that has come a long, long way to a healthy life after struggling for years with anorexia, one of the times that she was gone, I sent her just a ton of art supplies because it's something that she enjoyed, and I found artistic things that had positive messaging on them because art's her thing. And that was one of the things that gave her hope, that gave her a sense of value, that she had something to contribute or a way to express. So it's really important that we not try to fix what's going on, but that we give tools and options and control and empowerment. When we ask these questions, we're not asking for our sake. We're asking so that we know how we can frame the information that they're sharing with us so that it will have purpose in keeping them looking forward. Play along with me. You know how I asked you to say, I cannot, the word suicide? Okay, people at home, we can hear you, so you have to play too. I would like for you to actually say out loud this phrase that right now is numbered as number 2. You cannot fix the problem, except for I want you to say, I cannot fix the problem, because our number one greatest challenge in QPR is getting out of the way. Maybe sometimes more so even for the men who have been told that that's their role. And then for some of us women who tend to act more like men in trying to fix everything. On the count of 3, I would love for us to say, I cannot fix the problem. And remember that the only thing that you have any control over in this world truly is yourself. 1, 2, 3. I cannot fix the problem. I don't care what the problem is that they identify or that you think their problem is. Again, on count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I cannot fix the problem. Again, 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's not going to work. You guys aren't believing me. On the count of 3, I want you to hear and believe that you are not the solution to whatever is going on with somebody who is in a difficult situation. You are a path toward hope. But on 3, 1, 2, 3. I cannot fix the problem. And you keep telling yourselves that, because that is not your role and you need to stay in your lane. You are there to help them discover what hope looks like for them and to be a support of encouragement so that they grasp it. That is your only role. You're not a doctor. I suspect that you don't want the role of being God, at least I don't. And you don't want to step into their shoes and live their life because it's theirs. Give them their life. That's what hope is. And that's your only role. So in persuasion, here's what works best in persuasion. And some of this is going to mirror what you saw Pastor Phil and I do. Persistent statements that suicide is not a good option or suggest better alternatives. Now, in this particular situation, we didn't have to get so much into that because I was still at the phase of just simply understanding what he's going through and acknowledging and recognizing that pain. However, if you've got that double down, no, you don't understand. I mean, I seriously have messed up so much. Suicide is an option, and it's okay to say it's an option, but it is not your only option. And what happens for individuals who are suicidal, severely suicidal, would all of you guys take one arm, just put it out in front of you, at home do this with us, out in front of you. What I want you to do is we're going to slowly move our arm to the side, and I want you to get it right to the point where you cannot see your arm or your hand anymore, and then stop. Okay, keep looking forward and stop when you can no longer see. Okay. Is your hand still there? I'm glad, because I was worried. Okay, your arm is still there. How do you know that it's there? It's getting heavy. It's a part of you, right? You don't have to see it to know that it's there. You can put your arms down. You don't have to see it to know that it's there. 2 points to this. Number one, somebody who's having thoughts of suicide, we don't have to see it for it to be there. Okay? They don't have to tell us, and we don't have to be inside of their head for us to know that, for it to actually exist. So when they say that they're suicidal, we believe it. Even if it is just to get attention, the attention that they need is to be validated and recognize that what they're experiencing, that pain, needs to have some form of relief. Secondly, what's over here, that's theirs. It's a part of them, whether they want to talk about it or not, or how they choose to share it. All of their experiences, all of their joys, all their failures, all their disappointments, that is all a part of them, the same way that you have yours. And whether we're talking about it in full detail, whether we're putting it out there for everybody else to see, it's still there. This conversation is to help them recognize and call out what they might not necessarily be able to see. And them talking about suicide is simply all of these options here that they once could see became narrow and narrow and narrow until the only option that is still left in their mind is suicide. That does not mean that there aren't new options that maybe they've never considered. So when we're talking about suggesting better alternatives, that's where it's really important that we ask those questions to understand, who do you usually talk to? What do you usually do? Be empathetic and watch that video so you understand the difference between sympathy and empathy. It'll go a long way in how you connect. In a caring way, you're going to challenge errors of belief. So in my case, when I said, my children are better off without me, a different dialogue could have been, what makes your heart smile? What was the last thing that one of your boys did that made you smile? Because now I'm seeing that. And I can focus on that. And it's easy enough then to say, I wonder how much joy that brought to them too when they were playing on the swing and it made you smile. So there's little ways that we can take their experience and create a different perspective. Because sometimes it's just those little teeny tiny things that say, you know what, maybe my kids wouldn't be worse off, or wouldn't be better off if I wasn't here. But that has to come from within me, not an assumption impressed upon me. Does that make sense? We have to acknowledge their pain. In the conversation that Phil and I had, that's a lot for him to take on, right? Acknowledging that, and that it must be really, really difficult. And then allowing him to say, yeah. You know, or normally I would talk to my wife, but I just can't put that on her too. And then more important than anything is just that you're not alone. The fact that I am right here with you, and I'm honored that I even get this opportunity to talk with you, to share in this moment with you. And we're going to get through this together. Because together, that F test would have been a breeze, right? So anytime that you're trying to figure out how to express that you truly want to help somebody, use the word together. I'm going to stay in my lane because this is your journey. But I'm really honored that you would maybe consider letting me walk this journey with you. Would that be okay? Okay? Your willingness simply to listen is the key to inspiring hope. That is the absolute connection. Hearing so that their heart feels heard. Another great phrase, I see you. I see you. You don't have to explain what that means. It says everything. It can make all the difference in helping somebody accept the help that you're going to be offering them. And again, if one of the major contributing factors to suicidal action is that somebody feels like they are alone, when you say, thank you for allowing me to walk this journey with you, thank you for sharing your thoughts with me, that must have been hard. I'm just thankful that you were willing to, which, by the way, if you watch that video, I'm saying a lot of the words that Brene Brown says. But we have to be willing to hear what they're saying. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use what they have shared with us when we've asked all those questions. So you'll notice that when I asked Phil, who do you normally talk to, he gave me his answer. But we know that that's not where he wants to go right now because he doesn't want his wife to be worried more. So we open the dialogue again. Who else might you talk to that you trust and feel like you could share? He says who his friend is. Does your friend know what's going on right now? Most of it. Do you think if we were to call your friend that he might stay on the phone and just talk with us a little bit? Or maybe even if he's available, come join us? The idea is to get a circle of people to build a network of support. Because you helping another person on your own is not going to be the solution. We need to build a network of support. And if we can eventually get to the point of talking about what those number one chronic pain points are, then we can begin to help them align with different resources and support systems and programs and those things that can help de-escalate the pain for those most severe pain points. So, can we call so-and-so, which is exactly what we did as the example. Would you go with me to get some help? I actually know somebody. And would you go with me to just see if he might have some resources? Will you let me help you get help? Do you notice in all of these, we are not imposing what the solution is, we are giving choice. We are giving choice. And will you promise not to do anything to harm yourself until we can connect? You know, it's okay sometimes even just to say, can we promise that for the next 24 hours, we are going to stay connected with one another and that we will have this same conversation and pick up here in 24 hours to see where things are at right then. And until then, you'll surround yourself by people to support you, myself included. The referral part of this is recognizing that if you just simply tell somebody, oh, you know what, if you call so-and-so, or here's a business card, or here's a pamphlet, or, okay, you're going to be good, right? I know that this seems like it's really difficult for you, but I need to go watch my favorite program on TV. You need to stay present, and you need to make sure that that referral step is done in a way that it basically allows them to make that commitment to getting help. So, this is my phone. I'm going to demonstrate to you how you make a referral shy of actually going with the person to their therapist, okay? Or calling social services and seeing if somebody can come and provide different resources, which is kind of what we're going to do here. So here's my phone. I'm going to sit up here so that you guys can see because I'm sitting next to Phil, my friend. Phil, my friend, can you come sit with me? So your best referral is if you can actually go with the person right then to some place to get help, okay? Or in many cases, like if you go to a mental health facility to get that help, then they can begin processing for whether or not they would be able to help them. But a lot of times that's just not possible. So the next best is going to be having the individual give you a commitment that they're going to get help. And what I want to do is I want to actually demonstrate for you what that looks like. We're going to expand their network, and it's going to sound something like this. Phil, you said that you'd be okay if we were to give a call to your friend. So I can call right now, unless you would like to make the phone call. What would you prefer? We can try him right now.
Why don't I call him? He knows my number.
Excellent.
He'll answer if it's my number.
Okay. So at this point, Phil's going to go ahead and he's going to dial his friend's number, and I'll say, do you want to speak or do you want me to kind of help? And at this point, we probably have gotten pretty deep. I'm a little bit more calm. Phil might be a little bit more emotional, and he's saying it's okay for him to call. But now I'm going to offer that if he'd like, I can let your friend know kind of what's going on, unless you want to talk.
Pastor, I'm going to let you talk to this lady.
Wonderful. Hi, Pastor. This is Deetra. Yeah, hi. I'm here with Phil. I know he said that you guys have been really good friends for a long time. And we've just been having a conversation about some of the challenges that he's been facing. And we were wondering if it's okay, I'd like to put you on speaker. Would that be okay? Okay. I put it on speaker. We are both now a part of this conversation. And I would at that point share, yeah, we were kind of just thinking about what might be helpful in expanding a network of support. And since you are somebody that Phil really appreciates and feels like he trusts, I was wondering if you might be busy in the next hour or so, that perhaps we could all get together and just give some consideration to various resources and support that might help Phil. Would that be okay? Now, this is the ideal because Phil's friend answered. What happens when Phil's friend doesn't? Okay? He's talking, and he's probably going to look at me and say, it just went to voicemail. So go ahead.
It just went to voicemail.
Here, why don't you, can I just see that? Let's put it on speaker. And we're listening at this point because it's playing, the little message. And I'm going to say, hi, Pastor, this is Deetra, and I'm a friend of Phil's. That's the number that obviously is showing up on your phone right now. Phil, can you say hi?
Hi, I'm right here.
Okay, just so you know that he's really here with me. I didn't steal his phone. And we've just been talking about some challenges that he's been going through. It sounds like you're pretty familiar with some of these things. And I was hoping that when you get this message that you might be able to give Phil a call back. And then also, if you wouldn't mind giving me a call, I just want to make sure that we stay connected and that he feels that support. So again, my name is Deetra, and my phone number is, I would share my number. You guys have it on the business card. And again, my number is, and I would share my number again. Thank you so much. We really look forward to hearing from you and getting some thoughts from you on how we might be able to make this journey a little easier.
Thanks, Pastor.
And we hang up. Now, let's take, for example, if we were going to end up trying to call a mental health facility, because you know what, these little computers, they're pretty impressive. You can make a phone call directly from a website and get a call over just to see whether or not maybe they're in your network, whatever the case might be. And so we make the phone call, but it's after hours and it goes into voicemail. At that point, I offer that we're going to put it on speaker. Would that be okay? We have it on speaker, and I say, do you want me to leave the message?
Sure.
Okay.
You can start.
And in most cases, if I'm calling a place and it was kind of like, well, what if we were to try such and such, would that be okay? He's like, I have no idea what I'm going to say. Okay, but yeah, you can make the phone call. Then what I'm going to say is, hi, my name's Deetra. I am here with a friend of mine, Phil, and he's just been struggling a little bit. And actually,
Quite a bit, really, but...
Yeah. So Phil, can you just say hello?
Hello, this is Phil.
Thank you. And so we're just calling to see if there may be some resources that you're aware of for somebody who's been going through a lot of challenges in his personal life, and sometimes just feels like it's very difficult to get up in the morning, and wondering what he can do to make this journey a little bit easier. If you could please give us a call back at your earliest convenience. Phil's phone number. Phil, can you leave them your phone number? And then he's going to leave his number, and I would say, Phil, can you just repeat that real quick so they know they've got it? He'd repeat it, and I'd say, and my number, if you wouldn't mind, please just give me a call. You don't need to share with me anything about what you talked to Phil about, but just so that I know you got this message. My number is, and then I would repeat my number again. Thank you so much. We really look forward to hearing from somebody at your earliest convenience. Click. Now, here's what happened during that conversation. Seems pretty natural, right? The way that we just conducted that phone call, though, was completely intentional. I'm going to break it down for you. First of all, I asked Phil if it was okay if we called, right? Because this is his journey and he gets to choose. And he may say no, and that's okay, as long as we're still together and we're talking, because another 15 minutes later, maybe there's a different idea that I have of somebody that we can call or that he comes up with, right? Friends and family being involved is very important. But it's also extremely important that at some point Phil feels comfortable speaking with somebody who is experienced in helping in suicide ideation, whether it be a mental health professional, social services, or a pastor. There's a lot of people and professions that this is something that they are very, very equipped to be able to deal with. And so we do want to make sure that we have at least one of those resources out there that we can speak with. And it's not always going to work out that the person's going to be able to answer in that clinic or office, or even for a pastor to be available. So by making that introduction and me being willing to take the lead, I introduce myself and I feel much more comfortable with this. And then as soon as I say, that phone conversation originally was with a voicemail box, or it was with the person that we were just calling. As soon as I say, Phil, will you say hello? I just
Committed myself. I've committed myself to the conversation, to the help.
And as soon as I say, Phil, will you leave your phone number? In his mind, he has the expectation that he's going to be receiving a phone call. When is that phone call going to happen? Sometime in the future.
Hopefully quickly.
Okay, sometime in the future, right? Hope is planted in the future. Fear is always rooted in our past. Always. Anything you're afraid of, there's been something in the past that caused you to fear it. Hope is whatever's going to happen in the future, the potential of what could happen. So if the potential is that that phone call is going to come, and we were trying to offer hope, and he just said it was okay for us to talk, and now we've left a message and they have his phone number, and I can say, I'm going to really be looking forward to that phone call. Please let me know as soon as you hear from them. Of course, we're still going to stay and have a nice conversation and kind of get to that point. But that is hope. And it is not giving ideas and leaving it for somebody who needs to have a network of support around them in order to build into a new frame of mind.
And I'm sorry, but we have to wrap up.
We're actually almost done. Best practices: get others involved, follow up with the person, which we just talked about, and stay connected. Since almost all efforts to persuade someone to live instead of attempt suicide will be met with some agreement and relief, don't hesitate to get involved or to take the lead. Again, knowledge is power. When you share it, that's empowerment. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. That really is my last slide.
And thank you so much to Deidre. It's been a blessing to be with her. We certainly appreciate all that she's said and done. Thank you to everyone for all that you've done. And out on the front, there are extra materials. If you want some materials to hand to someone else, to share with someone else, go for it. Deidre has a book that...
Yep, give me a number. Pick a number, any number that's between 1 and 20.
15.
15, okay. This is a book. One of you guys are going to walk away with it. I'm going to count to 15 and count you off. When we land on the number 15, you're the one who gets it. It reads like Chicken Soup for the Soul. It is called the I'm Possible Project. My story is in here somewhere. I think that it's in this section about suicide. But it's a beautiful book about a number of different challenges that people have faced and how they took the impossible and made themselves possible. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Gentlemen in the back. Thank you so much, everybody. It has been an honor and a privilege. I'll stick around in case you have additional questions or even something a little bit more personal that you'd like some help with. So
thank you to all of you. Again, if you'd like anything off the table, feel free to help yourself. Feel free to grab any snack that's left and take it with you. Have a little something on the way. And if we can be of help to you into the future, we would love to do that for you as well. God bless all of you.
And you will be getting a survey. Please complete the survey. I say this on behalf of Institutional Ministries who brought you the program. That is how they make decisions on what programs are needed and how they can better serve you and others throughout the state and community.
That'll be coming by email. Thank you so much again.